The ridge collapsed in sections. Not all at once, that would have been cleaner. Instead, the mountain face came apart in chunks, each explosion sending frozen rock and shrapnel through the defensive line like God's own buckshot. Corporal Jensen pressed his face into permafrost that smelled of iron and diesel, counting seconds between impacts. 4, 3, 2.5. They were tightening the pattern. Mortars inbound, northwest vector. Lieutenant Braddock's voice cracked across the radio frequency, high and thin. 23 years old. First deployment. The kid had done well for 6 hours, but his voice was starting to fray at the edges, unraveling like cheap rope under tension. Jensen risked a glance over the berm. Through the snow curtain, he could make out movement dark figures repositioning along the opposite ridgeline, maybe 800 meters out. Professional, disciplined, not the rabble they'd expected when command sent them into this godforsaken valley with outdated intelligence and optimistic supply projections. The .50 caliber M82 sat 15 meters to his left, massive and silent behind its improvised snow berm. Nobody had touched it in 40 minutes. The position was too exposed, too obvious. Their designated marksman, Sergeant Crawford, had taken shrapnel to the shoulder during the initial barrage. He was somewhere behind the line now, probably going into shock, wrapped in someone's sleeping bag while the medic tried to stop the bleeding with frozen fingers. Jensen's ears rang from the artillery. The world had compressed into a narrow tunnel of immediate survival. Incoming fire, available cover, the copper taste of adrenaline coating his tongue. He didn't notice her at first. She appeared at the edge of their perimeter like she'd materialized from the snowfall itself. Yellow jacket bright as a highway sign, completely wrong for a combat zone. Dark pants, boots that had seen better decades, a pack that hung from her shoulders with the settled weight of long familiarity. She was maybe 50. Lean in the way that comes from years rather than gyms, with gray hair pulled back tight against her skull. Nobody challenged her. The defensive line was chaos, radios screaming contradictory orders, wounded men being dragged toward the rally point, ammunition being redistributed from the dead to the living. One more body in the confusion barely registered. She walked directly to the M82. Jensen watched her kneel beside it, moving with the economy of someone who'd performed the same actions 10,000 times. She didn't fumble with the scope covers or waste motion checking the chamber. Her hand simply knew where everything was, the way a pianist's fingers find keys in the dark. Private Kowalski, manning the adjacent position, finally noticed. Ma'am, you need to get back to. The mountain opened up again. 3 rounds landed in sequence, walking up the slope toward their position. The concussion wave hit like a physical blow, and Jensen's world went white with snow and smoke. His ears screamed. Somewhere close, someone was crying. When his vision cleared, the woman in the yellow jacket was still there, still kneeling, checking the M82's barrel with the calm focus of someone reading a grocery list. What the hell is this? Captain Marcus Reeves appeared through the smoke, moving down the line with the rigid posture of a man trying to maintain command through sheer force of spine. He was built like a linebacker, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with a face that reddened easily under stress. Right now, it was the color of raw steak. The woman didn't look up from the rifle. Position's been empty 12 minutes. Figured someone should. I don't care what you figured, ma'am. This is an active combat zone, and I need you back behind the casualty collection point. Now. She finished her inspection of the chamber, closed the bolt with a sound like a bank vault ceiling. With respect, Captain, your casualty rate's about to get worse if you don't suppress that support by fire position. She nodded toward the opposite ridge. They've got you ranged. Another 3, maybe 4 minutes before they adjust and drop rounds directly into this trench. Reeves's jaw worked. I'm aware of the tactical situation. What I'm not aware of is who the hell you are or why you're handling military equipment. Sarah Hendricks. She said it flat, without emphasis. I was attached to your unit for the duration of this operation. Civilian consultant. Reeves made it sound like an obscenity. Lady, I don't know what you consulted on back at base, but out here, we've got actual qualified personnel. An RPG streaked across the valley, trailing white smoke. It hit the rocky outcrop 30 meters upslope and detonated with a flat crack that sent shards of granite singing through the air. Someone screamed. Hendricks remained motionless, her hand resting on the M82's stock. Captain, that rifle's rated effective out to 1,800 meters. I can see their command element from here. Give me 2 minutes and I can. Absolutely not. Reeves cut her off with parade ground authority. This weapon system requires specialized training and I'm trained. I'm sure you took a weekend course somewhere. But this is not the time for... Sergeant. Reeves turned to a thick-shouldered man with a tobacco-stained mustache. Escort Miss Hendricks to the rear area. Make sure she stays there. The sergeant name tape read. Williams nodded and moved toward her. Ma'am, if you'd come with me. Hendricks looked at the M82 for a long moment, her fingers trailing across the scope mount with something like regret. Then she stood, shouldered her pack, and followed Williams down the trench without another word. Jensen watched them go. The yellow jacket stood out against the gray snow like a target marker. Impossible to miss. Utterly wrong. He'd been in country for 9 months and had never seen anything like it. Bright colors were for FOBs and rear echelon. Out here, you wore earth tones and prayed to blend into the landscape. She walked like she didn't care who saw her. Fucking civilians, Kowalski muttered, hunching deeper into his position as another mortar round whistled overhead. Think they know everything. Jensen didn't answer. He was watching the opposite ridge, where muzzle flashes sparked like fireflies in the growing dark. The enemy was repositioning again, moving with the coordinated efficiency of a well-drilled unit. Not militia. Not local fighters making a quick raid for supplies and glory. These were professionals, and they had the high ground. The situation deteriorated with mathematical precision. At 1,647 hours, the enemy machine gun position on the northwest ridge found their range. Tracer rounds began stitching through the defensive perimeter in long, reaching bursts that forced everyone below the trench line. Movement became impossible. Wounded men stayed where they fell. At 1,652, Lieutenant Braddock tried to call for air support and discovered their radio frequencies were being jammed. Someone on the other side had electronic warfare capability, which meant this wasn't the opportunistic ambush it had first appeared to be. This was planned, coordinated. At 1,658, they lost another man, Private Chen, who'd made the mistake of trying to reposition during a lull. The sniper round caught him in the throat. He was dead before his body hit the frozen ground. That was when everyone understood. There was a counter-sniper working the opposite ridge. Skilled, patient, waiting for targets of opportunity. Captain Reeves crouched in the command post, a glorified hole scraped into the mountainside, and tried to look like he had answers. His radio operator, a kid named Mendez, kept cycling through frequencies, searching for anything that wasn't white noise or enemy chatter. Sir, we need to move. Williams had appeared at the entrance, snow caked in his mustache. Staying here, we're just targets. Move where, Sergeant? They've got overwatch on every approach route. We try to displace and they'll cut us apart in the open. So we sit here and wait to die? Reeves's face went from red to purple. We hold position and wait for the jamming to clear. Division knows our location. Relief will. A burst of machine gun fire punctuated his words, sending both men flat against the frozen earth. Shrapnel sang overhead. Someone was sobbing somewhere in the dark. That counter-sniper's the linchpin, Williams said quietly, once the firing stopped. Take him out. We might have a chance to maneuver. Leave him operational. He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Reeves knew it. Everyone knew it. But Crawford was out of action, bleeding and morphine-stupid behind the aid station. Their other designated marksman, Corporal Hayes, had been in the lead vehicle when the IED initiated the ambush. They'd scraped what was left of him off the dashboard and put it in a bag. The M82 sat empty. Useless. What about the woman? Mendez looked up from his radio. Hendricks. She seemed to know her way around that rifle. She's a civilian. Reeves said it like that settled everything. So, was Audie Murphy, before he enlisted. That's not. Reeves stopped, took a breath, started over. Even if she has some recreational shooting experience, working a .50 cal in combat conditions against a trained counter-sniper is completely different than... The mountain shook. 3 mortar rounds hit in rapid succession, walking up the slope toward their position with terrifying accuracy. The third round landed close enough that the blast wave collapsed one wall of the command post, burying Reeves up to his waist in loose rock and frozen dirt. Williams dug him out with his bare hands while Mendez screamed into the radio, begging anyone, anywhere, for fire support that wasn't coming. The helicopter came in low and fast, hugging the terrain like it was being chased. Which, given the volume of fire suddenly directed skyward, it probably was. Tracer rounds arced up from the enemy positions in streams of light, searching for the aircraft as it hammered toward their perimeter. It didn't land so much as hover 3 feet off the deck, long enough for 2 figures to jump clear. Then it was already climbing away, twisting through the air as its countermeasures popped flares like fireworks. Who the hell, Reeves? still spitting dirt, stared as the first figure straightened. General Thomas Raymond cut an imposing figure even covered in snow and aviation fuel residue. 3 stars, weathered face, eyes like chips of granite. He'd started his career in Vietnam when Reeves was still in diapers, had commanded everything from rifle companies to entire theaters. Men who'd served under him spoke of him with the kind of respect usually reserved for natural disasters, awe mixed with healthy fear. He moved down the trench line without preamble, his aide, a major named Stevens, struggling to keep pace. Raymond's gaze swept across the defensive positions with the practiced assessment of a man who'd spent 40 years reading battlefields. "Sit, Rep," he said to Reeves. "Not a question, a command." Reeves scrambled to his feet, trying to brush dirt off his uniform with trembling hands. "Sir, we're pinned down by coordinated fire from—" "I can see what you're pinned down by, Captain. What I want to know is why you haven't suppressed that counter-sniper position and why your wounded are still in the kill zone." "Sir, we've lost our designated marksman and—" "The M82? Unmanned, sir. Nobody qualified to." Raymond was already moving, walking the trench line with the calm deliberation of someone taking a morning stroll. Bullets cracked overhead. Mortar rounds continued to fall with metronomic regularity. He ignored them the way other men ignore rain. He was 30 meters down the line when he came to the M82 position. And stopped. Not slowed, not paused. Stopped, mid-stride, like someone had cut his power. His aide nearly collided with him. "Sir?" Raymond didn't answer. He was staring at something behind the rifle position, a figure in a yellow jacket, sitting with her back against the trench wall, calmly eating what looked like a field ration from a container that had probably been manufactured before Reeves was born. The general's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, disbelief, something that might have been shock on a less controlled man. He took 3 steps forward, stopped again. Sarah Hendricks looked up from her meal, met his gaze with perfect calm, and nodded once. The general's eyes dropped to her chest, to the small pin attached to her yellow jacket. Tarnished silver, worn smooth at the edges, shaped like a scope reticle with a single star at its center. The metal was scratched and dented, held in place with what looked like a bent safety pin because the original clasp had broken decades ago. Raymond's lips moved, forming a word without sound. Then, he said it aloud, soft enough that only those within arm's reach could hear. "Impossible." 28 years earlier, in a war the Pentagon still refused to acknowledge in any meaningful detail, there had been a unit. No official designation, no patch, no place in the order of battle. Just 12 people, 11 men and 1 woman, pulled from various special operations commands and handed a mission profile that made suicide runs look like calculated risks. Deep reconnaissance, high-value target elimination, operations that couldn't be traced back to any flag or government. They'd called themselves the Radius, because their area of operations was whatever circle could be drawn around a target before someone figured out where the shot came from. Sarah Hendricks had been 22 when they recruited her, fresh out of a Marine sniper course where she'd outshot every man in her class and most of the instructors. She had a gift, the kind of natural ability that couldn't be taught, only refined. She could read wind by watching grass bend 300 meters away, could judge distance by the sound of someone's footsteps, could remain motionless for 18 hours, while mosquitoes drained her blood and her bladder screamed for relief. The Radius operated for 3 years, 67 confirmed missions across 4 continents. They'd never lost a member to enemy action. Then came Operation Granite Dove. The mission was supposed to be textbook eliminate a weapons dealer who was brokering sales between 3 different terrorist organizations. Intelligence said he'd be at a compound in the Hindu Kush, lightly guarded, vulnerable. Intelligence was wrong. The compound was a trap. Someone had sold them out to this day. Hendricks didn't know who. All she knew was that when her team went in, they walked into a kill zone that had been prepared specifically for them. The firefight lasted 11 hours. 11 of the 12 members of the Radius died. Some quickly, from headshots and catastrophic trauma. Others slowly, bleeding out while calling for extraction that never came because the radios had been compromised and every frequency was jammed. Hendricks survived by playing dead under 2 of her teammates' corpses. She lay there for 7 hours, breathing through a dead man's jacket, listening to enemy soldiers walk past so close she could smell their cigarettes. When she finally crawled out, 3 days later, 50 kilometers from the compound, she weighed 93 pounds and was suffering from dehydration so severe her kidneys had started to fail. The military buried her along with the rest of her unit. Not literally, but officially, administratively. The Radius had never existed. which meant its members couldn't die in combat. Hendricks was given a medical discharge, a modest pension, and a very clear understanding that discussing her service would result in federal prosecution. They let her keep the pin, probably because whoever processed her paperwork didn't know what it was. It was the only proof that any of it had been real. General Raymond understood all of this in the space between one heartbeat and the next, because he'd been there, not at the compound but in the operations center, watching the mission fall apart in real time through satellite feeds and radio intercepts. He'd been a colonel then, serving as a liaison officer. He'd argued for immediate extraction, for air support, for anything that might save the team. And he'd been overruled by people whose names were redacted from files that were themselves locked in vaults that officially didn't exist. He'd watched 11 people die because politics and plausible deniability mattered more than lives. Now, 28 years later, he was looking at the ghost of a unit he'd thought died with everyone else. Hendricks. He said her name like he was testing whether it was real. General. She nodded at his stars. Congratulations on the promotion. You. He struggled for words. I thought you were dead. I was. For a while. She took another bite of her ration. Got better. Somewhere in the distance, the enemy mortar team found their rhythm again. Rounds began falling with renewed intensity, marching closer to their position. The entire ridgeline shook. Raymond forced himself back to the present. Can you still shoot? Haven't touched a rifle in 26 years. That's not what I asked. Hendricks set down her ration container. Stood. Looked at the M82 with an expression Raymond couldn't quite read. That counter-sniper on the northwest ridge. He's good. Patient. Probably ex-military. Maybe Russian training. He's got the high ground, better position, and he's been watching your patterns for the last 2 hours. Can you take him? Probably not. Distance is about 900 meters through active snowfall with a weapon I've never fired and a scope I haven't calibrated. She paused. But I can try. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't false modesty. It was pure assessment, delivered with the flat honesty of someone who'd stopped caring about anything except accuracy decades ago. Raymond made his decision in the space it took his heart to beat twice. The rifle is yours. He turned to Reeves. Captain, you will provide Miss Hendricks with whatever support she requires. That is not a suggestion. Reeves looked like he wanted to argue. To his credit, he managed to swallow it. Yes, sir. The general started to walk away, then stopped, turned back. Hendricks. After this is over. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. There are people who would like to know what happened. To your unit. The real story. No, there aren't, sir. She said it gently, like she was explaining something to a child. Because if they did, someone would have asked 28 years ago. She moved to the M82 and knelt behind it, her yellow jacket bright as a warning flare against the snow. Raymond watched her for a moment longer, then continued down the trench line, his face unreadable. The .50 caliber M82 Barrett is not a subtle weapon. It weighs 29 pounds unloaded. Each round is 5.5 inches of brass and lead, capable of punching through engine blocks, brick walls, and most types of body armor. The sound of it firing has been compared to a small thunderclap, to a car door being slammed by an angry god. It is designed to reach out across impossible distances and turn human beings into component parts. Hendricks settled behind the rifle with the muscle memory of prayers learned in childhood, automatic, ingrained, deeper than conscious thought. Her body knew this position, her hands knew this weight. The cold that seeped through her jacket and jeans was the same cold she'd felt in a dozen other mountains, on 100 other ridgelines. Winds gusting northeast, Williams offered, crouching beside her. The sergeant had appointed himself her spotter without being asked. Visibility's maybe 300 meters. Hendricks didn't answer. She was breathing. Not the rapid, shallow gasps of the men around her, but slow, controlled cycles that dropped her heart rate with each exhalation. 4 count in, hold, 6 count out. Her father had taught her that back when she was 11 years old and learning to shoot jackrabbits on their ranch in Montana. Control your breath, control your body, control your body, control the shot. She checked the scope, a Leopold Mark IV. Good glass, properly mounted. Someone had zeroed it recently. She could see the adjustment marks. She'd have to trust their work. No time to re-zero, no ammunition to waste confirming. Through the scope, the opposite ridge was a gray smear of snow and rock. She watched, waited, let her vision go soft, searching for patterns rather than objects. There, a shadow that didn't quite match the terrain, a depression in the snow that suggested a prepared position. 920 meters by her estimate, give or take 10, elevated about 40 meters above her position. The wind at that distance would be pushing maybe 8 to 12 miles per hour, hard to judge in the snow. The counter-sniper fired. Somewhere down the line, someone screamed. The muzzle flash gave her everything. Position, exact distance 934 meters, angle of fire. She watched the snow patterns shift around his position as the blast disturbed them. She ran calculations that weren't quite conscious thought. Wind, distance, bullet drop. The 50 calories round would drop approximately 120 inches at this range. The wind would push it maybe 18 inches right. Temperature was near freezing, which would affect powder burn. Velocity. The scope was set for sea level. They were at 7,800 feet. Thinner air meant less drag, longer range, but also less predictable wind patterns. Too many variables. Too much guesswork. She pulled off her right glove with her teeth. The cold bit her skin immediately. Good. She needed to feel, needed the connection. Her finger found the trigger. Two-stage, breaking clean at about 5 pounds. She took up the slack, felt the wall. Target acquired, Williams whispered. Hendricks didn't acknowledge. She was breathing, counting, waiting for the moment between heartbeats when her body would be perfectly still, when the scope's crosshairs would settle on the exact point in space where physics and intention met. The counter-sniper moved. Just a subtle shift, repositioning for his next shot. Hendricks squeezed the trigger. The M82 roared. The recoil was massive, predictable, driving back into her shoulder with enough force to bruise. The muzzle blast kicked up a wall of snow. The sound echoed across the valley like the voice of judgment. 934 meters away, the counter-sniper's position exploded. The 50 calories round hit the man somewhere in the center mass. At that range, with that velocity, it didn't matter if he was wearing armor. The kinetic energy transfer was catastrophic. His body was thrown backward out of his position like a rag doll, tumbling down the rocky slope in a boneless sprawl. But the round didn't stop there. It continued through the body, through the sandbags behind him, into the rocky outcrop that served as the back wall of his hide. The impact shattered stone, sending fragments into the two men who'd been serving as his security element. One took shrapnel to the face and went down screaming. The other caught a fist-sized rock to the temple and dropped without a sound. The entire enemy fire position went silent. Then the secondary effects rippled outward. The counter-sniper had been directing their fires, coordinating the mortar teams, adjusting the machine gun positions. Without him, the enemy formation began to fragment. Fire became scattered, poorly aimed. The disciplined, coordinated assault degraded into hasty, uncoordinated shooting. Hendricks worked the bolt, chambering another round. Calm, methodical, the same motion she'd performed 10,000 times in training, in combat, in nightmares. She didn't celebrate, didn't react, just watched the enemy position through her scope, searching for the next threat. For 30 seconds, the mountain held its breath. Then the Americans began to move. Not wildly, Captain Reeves had enough control for that, but purposefully, taking advantage of the sudden shift in momentum. Machine gun teams repositioned to better angles. Mortar crews who'd been pinned down scrambled to set up their tubes. Riflemen who'd been hugging the earth for hours raised their heads and began acquiring targets. Jensen, still crouched in his position 20 meters from Hendricks, watched her with something approaching religious awe. She hadn't moved except to chamber the next round. The yellow jacket was snow-covered now, less bright, but still visible, still wrong, still somehow exactly right. Holy shit, Kowalski breathed beside him. Did you see? Shut up and shoot, Jensen snapped. But there wasn't any heat in it. He was thinking the same thing. The firefight continued, but the character had changed. Without their skilled overwatch, the enemy was fighting blind. Their mortars fell wide. Their machine gun fire grew sporadic. After 10 minutes, they began to withdraw, not a rout, but a tactical disengagement, pulling back in bounds while covering elements suppressed the American position. Professional to the last, but beaten. Hendricks remained at her post, scanning for targets through her scope. She fired 3 more times over the next 20 minutes, once at an enemy machine gun position that was slowing the withdrawal, once at what looked like a command element trying to reorganize their forces, once at a mortar tube that was still dropping rounds uncomfortably close to the American perimeter. 3 shots, 3 hits, distances ranging from 800 to 1,100 meters, through snow and failing light. Each time, she worked the bolt with the same mechanical precision. Each time, the recoil drove back into her shoulder without shifting her position. Each time, something on the opposite ridge stopped functioning. General Raymond appeared at her elbow just as full darkness began to settle over the valley. The enemy fire had ceased completely. In the distance, they could hear vehicles, the opposition withdrawing, conceding the field. He didn't speak, just stood there, looking at the woman in the yellow jacket who just saved his entire tactical position with a rifle she claimed not to have touched in 26 years. Finally, he nodded, a single, deliberate gesture of respect. Hendricks set the M82's safety, stood, her knees cracked audibly, age, cold, hours of kneeling on frozen ground. She grimaced. "Someone should clean that rifle," she said. "Boar's going to foul in this temperature." Raymond gestured, and Williams moved to secure the weapon. The sergeant handled it with careful reverence, like it was a religious artifact. Maybe it was now. Around them, men were emerging from their positions, checking their wounded, counting their dead. The butcher's bill wouldn't be final for hours, but they'd held. Against a superior force, with better positions and better planning, they'd held. Because one woman in a yellow jacket had made 4 perfect shots when perfection was the only thing that mattered. Nobody cheered. This wasn't that kind of victory. But as Hendricks walked back down the trench line toward the casualty collection point, men made way for her. Some nodded, some touched their helmets in informal salute. Captain Reeves, still covered in dirt and looking like he'd aged 10 years in the last 3 hours, stepped into her path. For a moment, Jensen thought he might actually apologize. Instead, Reeves just said, "Thank you." Hendricks nodded, kept walking. The yellow jacket disappeared into the darkness and snow, bright as a warning, impossible to miss. The after-action report took 6 hours to compile and another 3 days to work its way up the chain of command. General Raymond wrote it himself, which was unusual. 3-star generals don't normally write company-level AARs, but this wasn't a normal situation. The report was classified secret, no foreign, and included detailed accounts of the engagement, casualty figures, ammunition expenditure, and tactical analysis. Buried in Section 7, Subsection 4, was a paragraph about civilian consultants attached to the unit. That paragraph mentioned Sarah Hendricks by name. It mentioned the M82 Barrett rifle. It mentioned 4 confirmed enemy kills at ranges exceeding 900 meters under adverse conditions. And it mentioned carefully, using language that had been vetted by JAG officers and intelligence specialists, a small silver pin shaped like a scope reticle. The report didn't explain what the pin meant, didn't provide historical context, didn't reference any units or operations from 28 years prior, but it existed, in an official document, with a 3-star general's signature. 3 weeks later, a second document appeared in the classified archives. This one was authored by the Director of National Intelligence and addressed to a very small group of people who specialized in cleaning up historical messes. The document authorized the partial declassification of Operation Granite Dove, not the whole file, not the names of the people who'd given the orders or ignored the calls for help. Those would stay buried, but the unit designation, the radius, the mission parameters, the fact that 12 Americans had died conducting operations that their country would never acknowledge. It was a small thing, insufficient, 28 years too late, but it was something. In a ceremony that wasn't publicized, that involved only a handful of attendees, that took place in a Pentagon conference room rather than the parade ground it deserved, Sarah Hendricks was presented with a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star with Valor device. Not for the firefight in the mountains. That would have raised too many questions about what a 50-year-old civilian woman was doing with a sniper rifle in a combat zone. Instead, the medals were dated 1997. They were being awarded retroactively for injuries sustained and valor demonstrated during classified operations. General Raymond made the presentation himself. No speech, no press, just a brief handshake and the weight of 2 small pieces of metal pinned to cloth. Hendricks accepted them without comment, held them for a moment, feeling their weight. Then she carefully removed the battered silver pin from her jacket and set it on the table between them. "This belongs in a museum," she said quietly, "or a memorial, somewhere people can see it and remember that 12 Americans died doing their jobs perfectly." Raymond picked up the pin, examined it in the fluorescent light. "I'll make sure it's preserved, properly. Thank you, sir." He wanted to say more, wanted to apologize for not fighting harder, for not doing enough, for being part of a system that valued secrecy over honor. But the words wouldn't come. After 40 years in uniform, he'd learned that some debts couldn't be repaid with language, so he just nodded. Hendricks left the Pentagon that afternoon and didn't come back. The memorial was small, tasteful, located in a corner of Arlington National Cemetery that didn't get much foot traffic. Just a simple granite marker with 12 names etched into the stone, followed by a single date, 1997. No mention of how they died, no reference to the radius or Operation Granite Dove, just names and a date, the same as thousands of other markers in the same ground. But above the names, set into the stone in a small glass case, was a tarnished silver pin, shaped like a scope reticle, with a single star at its center. Hendricks visited once, 3 months after the ceremony. She stood in the spring rain and read the names of people she'd known, had fought beside, had watched die. She didn't cry. She'd done her crying 28 years ago, dehydrated and delirious, crawling through mountains with their blood still on her clothes. She touched the glass covering the pin. The metal underneath looked different now, cleaned, preserved, mounted for display. It didn't look like hers anymore. It looked like history, which, she supposed, was the point. A young couple approached while she was standing there, tourists, probably, drawn by the unusual pin display. They read the marker with polite interest, took a photo, moved on. They didn't know what they were looking at, didn't understand the weight carried by those 12 names. Maybe that was okay. The people who needed to know, knew. Hendricks left Arlington and drove west. She had no particular destination in mind, no schedule to keep, just the open road and a truck that had another 100,000 miles left in it if she was careful with the maintenance. The yellow jacket was folded in the passenger seat. She'd washed it, finally, got most of the cordite stains out. The fabric was thin in places, worn through at the elbows, but it was warm, and it fit well, and she'd probably wear it until it fell apart completely. Some reporter had asked her about it, during the brief media attention that followed the declassification. Why yellow? Wasn't that dangerous in a combat zone? Didn't it make her a target? She'd smiled and said something diplomatic about visibility during search and rescue operations. The real answer was simpler. Her daughter had given it to her 15 years ago, for Christmas, and it was the warmest jacket she owned. Somewhere in Nevada, she stopped at a diner that served breakfast all day, ordered eggs and coffee, and sat in a booth by the window, watching the desert stretch out under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Her phone buzzed. A text from General Raymond. The first class of the new sniper school just graduated. They asked about the memorial. Thought you should know. She typed back, "Good. Make sure they understand what it represents." "Will do. Take care of yourself, Sarah." "You too, General." She finished her breakfast, left a generous tip, and walked back to her truck. The highway stretched ahead, empty and clean. She had no idea where she was going, but that was fine. She'd spent 28 years carrying ghosts. Maybe it was time to let them rest. The truck's engine turned over, smooth and strong. She pulled back onto the highway, heading west toward mountains that rose purple in the distance. The yellow jacket was warm against the air conditioning. Through the windshield, the sky was endless. Behind her, in a cemetery on the other side of the continent, 12 names waited in stone for whoever might come to remember them. Above those names, a pin caught the light and held it, a small, bright point in the gathering dark. A reminder, a promise, a legend that refused to stay buried.